the other room, manning or womaning or personing the chat and also the info in case you have questions is Madeline, Mama Madeline. And then behind the scenes is the best technical guru in the business. And that's George, lovingly called Ski. So to formally welcome all of you on behalf of the board, the staff, and the volunteers of the Horizon Prison Initiative is our executive director. And it gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce the Reverend Dr. Renee Warmack Keels. So Renee, would you please welcome us?
She's muted.
You're muted.
Okay, how's that? Can you hear me now? There we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. It's my privilege and pleasure to thank you for joining us on this webinar series. This is our second series of webinars. And thank you again to the Ohio Mental Health grant for providing the funds for us to do this. What I'd like to say to you this morning is that the opioid epidemic touches every part of our society, home, school, church, just everywhere, touches men, women, boys, and girls. This series of webinars has been designed to provide you with information from professionals who are working in the addiction community. Our goal with this series of webinars is to provide you with tools to create strategies for action plans in your communities. During the 5 weeks, you will hear personal real-life stories from persons impacted by the opioid addiction crisis. They are stories of struggle, but they are also stories of transformation. We hope that your experience here will be insightful and will move you to action. I'm thankful for each of the staff, the volunteers, Mujeda, just everyone who's been involved in putting this webinar series together. So thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you, Renee. So to kind of set the context and to also welcome you, we were very lucky that our grant provided for a community outreach manager. And so for those of you who were in contact or were contacted by Mujeda, we thought you might like to see his face and his handsome face so you could put a face with that voice that you've been talking to. So hopefully Mujeda he's at work. So hopefully he's been able to sign on and take some time so that he can set the context for you and also introduce our storyteller. So Mujeda?
I don't think he's on yet.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
There he is.
Yay.
Can you hear me?
Yay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, yay.
You're there.
Hey, good morning. How's everybody doing?
Good morning.
Good.
Good morning.
It's good to see everybody. So I'm not going to waste any time. My name is Mujeda Muhammad. I am a restored citizen and I am an alumni of the Horizon program. I was incarcerated for 27 years, and Horizon became the finishing touches on me before my release, you know, and it's a beautiful program. I'm happy and elated to be still working with Horizon after having gone through the program and now out here, you know, in the free world, you know, working with the program and working in this opioid crisis webinar series. So I'm here today to add a little more context to what we're doing, you know, and I just want to first of all congratulate, you know, Jody, Mary, and Mama Madeline for putting together the theme for the webinar series, the Head, Heart, and Hand initiative, you know, because the head, you know, it speaks to that we're coming in here and we're absorbing some information. We're being educated. You know, for some of us, we're being taken out of the light and into the darkness. That's what educate, the root word, means, to be brought out of darkness into light. You know, so that is the head part. And after being brought out of that darkness into the light, after being enlightened, it is our hope that the heart will be quickened, you know, and that in the quickening of the heart, that the empathy and the care will come forth, and you will find it within your heart to take some type of action phase with your hand. You know, so that is the symbolism behind the head, heart, hand initiative. You know, we receive this information, this education that brings us out of darkness into light. It quickens our heart, and in turn, our hands are activated to do something after at the completion of the webinar series. So that hopefully sets the stage for it. At this time, I want to take some time to introduce our first storyteller. Now, this gentleman is somebody who went through our program here. First of all, I'm a program instructor at the Impact Community Action Agency. And this gentleman, he had some substance abuse issues, and, you know, it kind of fell down. And, you know, when people come through our program, we represent it as a kind of like a pit stop. You know, have you ever looked at a Indy car race, and when them cars are going around the track, at some point they have to stop at the pit stop, you know, get touched up. Somebody's working with the driver, somebody's at the tires, someone's under the hood. But the goal is to get them touched up and ready and back into the race to win, right? And that was the gist of our program that this gentleman, his name is Dana Brock, went through. And he went through the program with flying colors, and he ultimately, like me, came back to Impact and got a job. His initial job was a intake coordinator, and then he ultimately moved up into a self-sufficiency case manager. So this is the gentleman that is going to talk with you today. He's going to be our first storyteller. I'm very proud of Dana. You know, I mean, he has just definitely risen to the heights, and he's still rising to those heights. Everyone here loves him, you know. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dana Brock.
All right, can everyone hear me? All right, good. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mujedit, especially for that marvelous introduction. I just want to say first and foremost that Mujedit, very near and dear to me, something like an older brother, someone that I look up to, someone that I still go to for good sound advice. So he's been very instrumental in my growth process. Just a little bit of background about me. I was born, raised here in Columbus, Ohio, a native, and I was born to a teenage mother, and we were all living in one household with my grandparents and everything. And then my mother, who then got with my younger brother's dad, my stepdad, and there began the cycle of abuse. I was born and raised in a domestic violence household, and there was also drug use in my household. The stepfather was a motorcycle gang member, and so needless to say, there was constant parties. There was a lot of things that I was exposed to at a young age that no child should be exposed to. And so at the age of 6, I had my first beer, and then began the cycle of addiction. From what I've learned about addiction, that long before the drug use, there is some type of character defect or innate desire for us to do things addictively. So growing up, I had always been obsessive, kind of insecure. I definitely had abandonment issues from my biological father not being around. And so once you add drugs on top of hopelessness, despair, and fear, that's a recipe for disaster. So there was a 32-year cycle of drug addiction. I started stealing beers out of the refrigerator at like 8 years old. By 10, me and my friends were back and forth stealing from our parents, drugs and alcohol. By the time I was 13, I started with marijuana. By the time I was 17, it was cocaine, and it just took off from there. I was kind of a whatever you got, but that's what we're doing type of addict. Gratefully, I never intravenously used drugs. However, had my drug career continue, it was inevitable. So I've been, in and out of incarceration. I have about 7 years altogether between 3 prison numbers. I'm currently on probation right now for a crime I committed back in 2017. Yet I have been doing some work with some wonderful individuals who I'll get to in a minute that has helped propel me to this position that I'm in right now. So as Mujed said, I came to Impact kind of in a broken state. I was in the Bell Center Cognitive Behavioral Treatment Center at the time when I came. Through that program, I was able to address those inner issues that I had with anger management, just being able to, I'm sorry, call contract. So with anger management and the reason why I acted out in a violent nature. So one thing that I've learned in some of the tools that I've been obtaining is that type of behavior is learned. So I ultimately grew up to be the monster that I hated in my youth. I was a drug addict. I became abusive. And again, I was in and out of incarceration. And so I was not really stable in a lot of ways. So when I got to that program, it helped me to get stable. It helped me to address the issues with abandonment, neglect, anger, my drug addiction, and how I could better cope with that. I learned a lot of tools about prayer and meditation, and ultimately gave my life back to Christ, who is my Lord and Savior. And I hope I don't offend anyone with that. And then, from there, once I was able to address the inner parts of me that were really broken down and had been, trodden, I was able to gain a sense of self. And in that gaining a sense of self, I knew right away that I had to put the drugs and alcohol down. I had came to this conclusion several times in my life. So how do I do that? I wasn't able to do it on my own. I know throughout my years, I declared that I wasn't going to drink and drug anymore, but I never had any success with maintaining any type of longevity of sobriety. I was, during the time I was in the Bell Center, I was privy to NA and AA. So in Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, I was able to gain some knowledge, build a support group, learn about step work, learn about how making meetings and regularly attending them could help give me the foundation that I need to obtain and sustain some longevity away from drug use. So today I'm proud to say that I have 3 years, 9 months, and 29 days today, clean and sober. And as Mujed said, I have been, it has just been a blessing. Today I am a self-sufficiency coordinator at Impact, and I absolutely love my job. It's the first time I had a job where I wake up and rush to work because in this particular field, I get to help people like me, people who are struggling in poverty, people who are struggling with drug addiction, people who have been in and out of incarceration and just don't know which way to go, help them find and learn that there's a better way. Through our various workforce development programs, we help people go from poverty and crisis to self-sufficiency and sustainability. I am the contact person for a CDL program.
Mr. Dana.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dana, my porcupine is a good timekeeper.
Okay.
And when he emerges
When he
for
gets to
you and
bouncing?
for everybody else from now on, you're the first one who gets to meet him.
All
But
right.
we're really on time, and you have
Okay.
ended with a wonderful, positive ending. So
All right.
really, thank you for your story, and
All right.
we're going to turn it over. Say a last sentence in there, Dana, and conclude, and then we'll move on to Rachel.
Well, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And, you know, you really can make it. It starts with self. Once a person makes the decision to change, it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
During your story, and you ended on such a positive, upbeat. But did anybody else hear a word that I heard? And that was trauma. And so, since we're all about action and about healing, we have one of the absolutely best people I know since I've met her in trauma healing. And Rachel Bertner is going to give us some things that we can do every day, because we've all suffered some type of trauma, to help us just get through the day. So Rachel, would you please
Good
share some
morning.
ideas with us?
Hi, and thank you. It's very nice. And Dana, thank you for your story. My name is Rachel. I run a meditation and mindfulness program for many rehabs all over the state, and I work with a lot of individuals who are healing from trauma. I've taught inside of correctional facilities, rehabs, and worked with human trafficking victims, all sorts of things. And then just people who are in the energy of everyone who is living amongst all of this pain. So one of the things that I'm hearing that I just want to point out to all of us who are listening is that we listen a lot with our heads, and then we're being asked to take action with our hands. And the place that's in between those two places is our heart. And so I want to just offer an exercise for all of us to just do when we listen to stories like the one that we just listened to and heard in our heads, and just to make sure that our bodies are listening consciously as well. Because Dana said a lot of heavy things, and we watch the news, we listen to each other, we go in the store, and just something as simple as when we see somebody give one of these quick looks and they look up and down and they go back, and that part of us just starts to activate. And so I just wanted to I will offer an exercise every time we meet, but just a breathing exercise to quiet that in the body and just check in. So I'm going to just ask that everybody notices where they're sitting, and if it is available to you, to just close your eyes, or even just if you don't want to do that, just watch me do it. But if it is available, to just close your eyes and take a really deep breath in through your nose. And then just exhale it out of your mouth. And to just do that again, taking a very, very deep breath in through your nose and exhaling it out of your mouth. And then do that again, but take a deeper breath than you've taken all day. Just taking a really, really deep, 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 deep breath, and then exhale that out. And if your eyes are closed, just leave them closed. And just taking a deep breath and thinking about your shoulders sliding down your back just a little bit more. And just considering that we're listening to a man, a grown adult, talking about a 6-year-old child that took his first drink. And just holding in space in our body, just actually feeling that difference. What a gift that somebody can get to a place and how much help they need in that. And just breathing into that energy of support. And now take another really deep breath, just in through your nose, taking a deep, deep breath, and then exhaling it out of your mouth. And then opening your eyes and just coming back to looking at the screen. And remembering that one of the most important things that we all do and recognize as humans that have a biological clock inside of us where we respond to each other's breath. and just noticing if it changed anything, to just get quiet and take a few deep breaths even after listening. And I'm going to keep, before the hedgehog comes up, or groundhog or porcupine, whatever it is, starts yelling at me, I'm going to hold time with that. Thank you, everybody, for just taking a minute to breathe together, and everybody for being here. What you're doing is so close to my heart. I'm also somebody in recovery. And so you guys just being here supports people that I love and a journey I've been through. So I will see you next week. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rachel. Now, see, isn't she wonderful? Don't we all feel better? So I think by now we all know that the opioid crisis is an epidemic. So literally, we are in an opioid epidemic within a pandemic. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news at all, you know that there are certain steps that we can take in order to stay safe from COVID. It might involve wearing a mask. It might involve social distancing, washing our hands, being mindful of our surroundings, and hopefully all of the above. Well, just like staying safe from COVID, or realizing what's going on and how is it affecting us and how did it start, the opioid crisis, opioid epidemic is a lot easier to understand if you really get where it came from, if you get how it starts, if you get what's really going on. And I think you'll figure out by the end of the 5th webinar that a lot of it has to do with trauma. It is also societal. And so to set the stage for that, we have a video that we would like to share with you. And it's called The 3 C's and 2 S's. It's short, but I think it will give you an idea of what's really happening. How did substance use disorder get started? How does it start in people so young? And then we'll move on into Dr. Price explaining what's really going on with our brain and society. So let's show the 3 C's and 2 S's.
There's lots of discussion on why do people drink alcohol or use substances, and sort of competing theories, right? We have some folks that talk about this being the disease of despair. So you see a lot of addiction in communities hit hard by poverty, loss of job opportunities, and that's definitely very prevalent, and we can see the impact of that. But it's not the only way addiction starts. And I think that we really need to be careful and thoughtful and pay attention to the nuances of this. Addiction begins in adolescence. Again, 90% of those that have a substance use disorder today, they began using substances in their adolescence. And then that progresses over time. But some of the things about our own behavior, how we as a society handle certain circumstances or situations, we're becoming increasingly dependent upon alcohol, marijuana, prescription medications to handle those. So I like to talk about the 3 C's and the 2 S's. And as sort of another way to be cognizant of the decisions that we make, even in our normal everyday lives, that can lead us unintentionally towards an addiction. So the 3 C's are how we celebrate, and how we cope, and how we commiserate. So when I say to a volunteer or a staff person or a friend or a neighbor, how do you celebrate a new job or a new baby or good news at home or a promotion? We celebrate with happy hours and bottles of champagne and a lot of alcohol-focused celebration activities. And when we start to build those patterns, particularly if you have different risk factors, you can be sort of walking into unintended consequences of developing a substance use disorder. Same with how we cope with different situations. I had a hard day. I need a fill in the blank. Usually folks don't say yoga class, I need a meditation route, I need to have a really good workout or a walk or a talk with my mental health counselor or one of my best friends. It is, I need a drink, I need a something else that is using a substance to help manage even everyday stresses. And then the other one is how we commiserate. So I have my neighbor, my best friend, my sister, who's having a rough day, a rough time, small difficulties or big difficulties, and we commiserate with one another around alcohol, right? Around marijuana, around using substances to help us even cope with difficulty in our interpersonal relationships. These are some of those behaviors that we are unknowingly participating in that will lead to problematic misuse of alcohol and other substances that we need to be aware of. Now, the two S's that I like to sort of slip in there and talk about are how we sleep and how we handle stress. I am very worried about patterns that I see increasing on how people are even going to sleep at night. If folks are smoking marijuana every single night to get to sleep, there's potentially a problem there, particularly when you take into account your drinking patterns, your drinking behavior, your genetic risk, other prescription medications that you're using, and then how we handle stress. When we do not build coping mechanisms or our own skill set on how we handle stressful situations that are internal and about our own resources that we're building, and are instead focused only on alcohol or other substances, that's when we really start to build unhealthy patterns for our own health and wellness.
I know our speaker used the word alcohol quite a bit, but substance use disorder includes alcohol, marijuana, weed, pot, meth, any type of opioid, any type of opioid. So the 3 C's and 2 S's apply to whatever substance you're talking about. And I think to give you a little bit better handle on the science of addiction and what's really going on. And I use the term substance use disorder interchangeably with addiction. The more correct is substance use disorder. However, I think when us older, more mature people say addiction, you get what we're talking about. But really, to give us more of what's really going on is a gentleman who was gracious enough to share with us at our first webinar. And we had such a good response to him that he is back by popular demand. And I coerced him. I explained that I had put up with him in graduate school for 3 years and that he could put up with us again. So just to give us some more information for up here, for the head part, is Dr. Brad Price.
Hi, hello. Yeah. Oh, we got 2 cameras on this setup, and I don't like the one that's, I don't like that one, which was on the other one. But anyway, so much for that. Well, I hope you're all doing well. I have been in and out the last half hour. So I've heard a little piece here, a little piece there. I'm currently at work. I'm the clinical director at Recovery Works Portage, which is a detoxification facility at University Hospital in Ravenna, Ohio. And I'm in my office and don't have one of those fake Zoom backgrounds. This is the way it looks if you were sitting here. Nice thing I do have is that great blind that covers the window, so we don't get a lot of glare, blinding light. But anyway, it's good to be with you this morning. I enjoyed doing this last fall. I don't recall if it was September, October, whenever that was. It was a good time. I want to talk about, basically talk around a working definition of addiction and its component parts, if you will. I think it's important to have at least a basic working knowledge of, or a working definition of addiction or substance use disorders, chemical dependency. I use those interchangeably. Usually I just use addiction because it's shorter. But give you a sense of what that is. But a place I want to begin is to challenge your beliefs, attitudes, and values about mood altering chemicals, and by extension, the people who use them. Oh, and by the way, if you got a question at any point, the moderator, throw it to the moderator, and feel free to interrupt me. I think I built in some time for questions at the end, but if you wait, if you're like me, you'll probably forget what it was by the time we get around there. So just interrupt me if something's not clear, or you just want to make a comment about something. But bringing it back to beliefs, attitudes, and values. If I had a big old whiteboard here, and Mary knows what that means for me. I like filling it with things. What I would do though is a very simple thing right now. I would draw a vertical line, and then at the top of that vertical line, a horizontal line, making two columns. And the left-hand column I would label good, the right-hand column I would label bad. Not that I would use either of those words, but they're stand-ins for a positive and negative response or evaluation of something. What it represents is the way that we really like to think. As Westerners, we really enjoy getting things down to as few a number of categories or possibilities, as we can. We like true, false, 1, 0, black, white, either or. We like just a binary collection and then pick between one or the other. Well, I bring that up because the vast majority of Americans right now, in fact, I would say 99.9999, stretch it out with a bunch of nines, % of the American population uses that sort of scheme to evaluate their beliefs, attitudes, and values about mood-altering chemicals and the people who use them. Now, I use that more cumbersome phrase, mood-altering chemicals, to represent what Mary was just talking about a bit ago, that although the prior speaker in the video was talking about alcohol, it really represents all mood-altering chemicals. And she listed a number. In reality, there's a couple of thousand of them running around, the vast majority of which most folks aren't familiar and don't get used much. But we know of a lot of them. And what I'd like you to do for a moment is imagine you're somewhere where there's a large group of people and you want to do a survey. And the survey is simply asking folks what their attitudes and ideas are about mood-altering chemicals and their sense of the value of the mood-altering chemicals. What most folks are going to respond with is an answer that reflects some valuation, some rank ordering from top of a list where, well, okay, these might be okay, tolerated, what have you, and then there's a bottom, oh, these are terrible, bottom of the list. So we got two columns. Right now in the United States, if you were to stop 100 people at random anywhere and ask them something like that, at the bottom of the bad list, they're probably going to include heroin or fentanyl, some opiate, perhaps methamphetamine, cocaine, another opiate, those sorts of things. Top of the good list, the top 3 in the United States culturally would be alcohol, nicotine, and THC, the active ingredient in marijuana. And what we've done, my description of that simply presents a rank order. At the top of the good list, perhaps is alcohol. The bottom of the bad list is fentanyl. And we now have the 6 of them in some sort of rank order. What we don't know is how much worse or better one is than another. We don't know how large a gap there'd be between them. But we just know that, yeah, we go from alcohol down to fentanyl, fentanyl bad, that sort of thing. And most folks respond to any conversation, thought of mood-altering chemicals with a structure, with a valuing system that looks like that. Now, the top 3, the top of the good list, I've got a technical phrase, a technical term that I use for those. Those are the taints of ads. Now you're not going to find that written up anywhere. I mean, I just made that up. But what it boils down to is this: is if somebody's using alcohol, marijuana, or nicotine, well, that taints a bad. In comparison to methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl. Oh, well, those taints a bad. At least it's not methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl. And you get the idea of where I'm going with that. In other words, we've made value judgments about them and make some judgment about their relative value, their relative destructiveness. I mean, a whole range of things comes out of that. Well, that sort of rank ordering, that sort of scheme that virtually every American is walking around with in their head in some fashion is harmful when we're talking about mood altering chemicals, the people who use them, and any sort of treatment. It gets in the way. And as an illustration, I want, for the moment, I want you to think of your favorite relative, whoever that is. You know, grandparent, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, whomever, your favorite relative. It probably would take you a very, very short amount of time, split second, to come to the conclusion that it's not good if that favorite relative is using methamphetamine, heroin, or fentanyl. I mean, you'd be alarmed, horrified. Something must be done. You know, that can't go on. However, it might take you, well, weeks, months, years to come to the conclusion that this isn't healthy, good for, is a problem for that person if they're using one of the taints of ads. Again, alcohol, marijuana, nicotine. A relative weighting of them, and I use the favorite relative exercise to illustrate that. Well, you know, you can get some sense of how you're looking at them yourself. It gets in the way because all of those are equally dependence producing for addicts. For those of us that have a brain that's structured for addiction, while each of those has a different lethality potential, in other words, you're far more likely to die from an overdose of an opiate more quickly than you are something else, even though it's theoretically possible. I mean, we put so much weight on that we think, oh man, I mean, that's really bad. When we look at, you know, the tens of thousands of Americans that die of opiate overdose each year, and it's been going up. I mean, 20 years ago, you know, it was fewer than 5,000, and now it's, you know, it's generally over 60 the last couple of years. So we think, my God, that's a lot of people, and that's oh, something that's an epidemic. So we talk about this opioid epidemic. But what I'd suggest to you is that becomes a sort of blindness. It reflects a skewed valuing of those chemicals when you compare it to the fact, or look at the fact that almost 500,000 Americans each year die of smoking-related disease related to nicotine dependence. 8 times as many Americans die each year as a result of using that mood-altering chemical as opposed to opiates. The only difference is the immediacy of the lethality. An overdose of an opioid will kill you now. Long-term effects of nicotine dependence and smoking-related illness will take years, decades. And I always like teasing folks into, you know, thinking about that. And given the fact that now I'm old enough that I'm 4 years beyond the average lifespan of a smoker in the United States, that had I continued smoking, as I did once upon a time, 4 packs a day when you could do that, and that was some years ago. Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty good chance I wouldn't be here talking with you today. Point is, start thinking about your attitudes, your beliefs, your valuing of mood altering chemicals, and challenge them. That there aren't any taints of ads. For addicts, they're all troublesome. They're all damaging and create havoc and misery. Well, I want to leave that unless somebody has a question about it. Ah, yeah, Gene, sure. Okay. Well, let me move on. Let me talk about the dynamics of addiction, the internals. Working definition of addiction I use is that it's a pathological or sick love relationship that develops between a person and the reward produced by mood altering chemicals. Now let me break that down. Talking about a sick love relationship. Now that's a metaphor, yeah, but it's very fitting because what happens is folks whose brains are structured for addiction fall in love with, adore, devote themselves to, become preoccupied with, not the chemical necessarily, but the reward, the result, the experience, the effect of using the chemical. So that what addicts are actually addicted to is this experience and not the stuff. And I want to let that sink in. Now, obviously, the midbrain, the area of the brain where addiction resides, I mean, there is a physiological response to a particular chemical, particular molecular structure that gets into the bloodstream, goes to that part of the brain, and produces a particular response. So yes, there is definitely a physiological component, absolutely. But to understand what keeps folks going back, the metaphor of a sick love relationship just works so much better because it's not the study, it's the experience. One of the things that I don't use ever are, well, I dropped the word alcoholic, the word alcoholism out of my vocabulary a very long time ago. Basically what it amounts to is addicts are folks who have this relationship with that experience, but it's not tied to a specific mood altering chemical. I don't use phrases like, well, so-and-so is addicted to cocaine or heroin. No, it's a person who's an addict, has addiction, has a range of substance use disorders, and then we can identify what their favorites are. The vast majority of addicts use multiple substances, have over the course of their using history. So it's not a matter of, oh, I'm so particular that I'll only ever use cocaine. Now, if there isn't any cocaine available, even though it may be my favorite, I'll use what's available in order to get the experience of intoxication, because that's really what I want. I want that experience. If my favorite, if my drug of choice isn't available, well, sure, I'll use something else. Now, you may be objecting mentally and say, well, wait a minute. No, I know folks who only use one or two things. And sure, I understand that. Part of that has simply to do with the sophistication of the distribution network in the United States and the fact that on any given day in any corner of the country, you can buy any mood altering chemical with the money you have in your pocket. I mean, one of the things I know about my 4 oldest grandchildren, one just graduated from Florida State last summer, one's at the University of Florida, 2 are in high school, is that when they're at school with the money they have in their wallets, they can buy any mood altering chemical on any given day because somebody in the vicinity is holding it and will sell it to them. Now that's different than when I was in high school. When I was in high school in the 60s, it was a different situation. I mean, there were some things that were just very hard to find. So at that time, we talked about, drinking, smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana. Those became known as gateway drugs by folks who were trying to understand adolescent patterns of addiction and use of mood altering chemicals. And because adolescents were predominantly using those 3 chemicals in those years, well, they created this structure. Well, those are a gateway to something else. Much simpler explanation is we didn't have access to other things as readily. If you knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody that had cocaine or heroin or something else, okay, we might have considered it. But we probably also didn't have the money for it. There were some things that in those years were very expensive if you could find them. So it was just easier to buy alcohol, marijuana, and nicotine. But those days have long since passed. That hasn't been the case for really 4 decades now. When I started working in adolescent addiction in the 80s, yeah, I mean, adolescents at that time had ready access to virtually anything they wanted to say nothing of 2021, in which, well, everything's cheap. You know, the idea of there being, things that are only for the rich, well, that's long since passed. That's long since passed. So that notion of gateway drugs and that kind of thing, any sort of hierarchy, start working to eliminate from your way of looking at chemicals. It's about the experience. And whatever's there that will get me that experience a person's going to use. I talked a little bit about the physiological dimension, how the midbrain responds to mood-altering chemicals. And basically what it amounts to is the midbrain really likes it. And for the vast majority of folks whose brains are structured for addiction, it happens immediately, the first time that a person uses. Now, they may not be consciously aware of what's happened, but that deep part of their brain is. I always quote my son Dylan. He talks about the first time he used, and he's one of those odd individuals who can describe everything about it. He can tell you what time it was on the clock. He can tell you what he and his friends were talking about. He could describe the room to you where everybody was sitting. And it was after a band rehearsal. He was in a pretty good rock band at that time. And one of the guys brought some alcohol and some marijuana to one of their rehearsals. They sat around after and used. And it was the first time my son, in late winter of his freshman year of high school, was the first time he ever used mood-altering chemicals. And he describes it like this. This is a quote. "I discovered what I wanted to do as often as possible for the rest of my life." I'll repeat that. "I discovered what I wanted to do as often as possible for the rest of my life." And then he proceeded to rearrange things in his life to fulfill that motto, mission, vision, and slogan. And that's really a motto of every addict. Discovering what we wanted to do as often as possible for the rest of our lives. Experience intoxication. We fall in love with what it does for us, and we just want to do it again and again and again. And even if we're using something that's not a favorite and doesn't give us the sort of high we really like, well, we use it anyway because it is a high after all. Maybe not the best, but yeah, any high is better than no high. So, Dylan, I discovered what I wanted to do as often as possible for the rest of my life. So there's a physiological component there, certainly. But next it's also a spiritual experience. Now I'm going to just digress a moment and just talk a little bit about my working understanding of human spirituality, what it is and how it works, and just talk about a couple of its component parts. First of all, it's made up of a collection of relationships. And we can identify those, evaluate them, and see them as relatively negative or relatively positive. On the negative end of the continuum, we may be experiencing a life in a state of alienation. We're separate, apart from, not included. The opposite end of the continuum, well, we belong, we have a place, we're welcome. And spiritually, when it comes to our spiritual relationships, we spend our life sliding up and down that scale. We don't find a spot and then just stay there. We're constantly shifting. We experience some moments of life with 75% alienation, 25% belonging. A couple hours later, it shifts to 60-40. Tomorrow, it's some different. The point is, we're always in some balance. There's always some creative tension between the amount of alienation and the amount of belonging we're experiencing. And that has everything to do with the spiritual dimension of our existence. I'm not going to talk about it at all, but we could relatively evaluate the quality of those relationships. But I'm going to pass over that and get to what those relationships actually consist of. And what we are spiritually related to, connected with, is whatever or whomever is most important in our lives. Whatever or whomever is worthy of the title most important. Now, you can take out a piece of paper and write at the top, well, what's most important to me, and start making a list. And you'll wind up with a list that's skewed one direction or another. If you really want to know what's most important to you, don't ask, well, what's most important to me? Take two pieces of paper, and on the left-hand page at the top, write the question, what gives my life power? What is powerful in my life? In other words, what gets me up and gets me going in the morning? What sets my goals? What motivates me to move toward those goals, to accomplish them, to achieve them? Yeah, what empowers me to move through space and time? The second page, the question right at the top, is what in my life provides my life with meaning? What's meaningful in my life? And you start another list. Now, when you're done with the two lists, and it takes time. In the past, I've done retreats for groups where from Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon, all of the activities and exercises are designed to help people complete those lists, flesh them out, what's powerful and meaningful for you. But when you get done, when you look at them, and there'll be overlap, there'll be some things that will be on both lists, some things will be exclusive to one or the other, but when you have it and you look at it, you will have identified every relationship, every connection in your life that's worthy of the title most important. Simply because the only things worthy of that title are the relationships, people, experiences, and so forth that provide us with either power or meaning. And if we don't derive any power or meaning from it, it's just not that important. And we don't have a spiritual connection with whatever that is. So we're spiritually connected with whatever or whomever is most important, what provides life with power and meaning. Now, the next element that I'll speak of quickly is purpose in life. And we all have multiple reasons for living and multiple purposes for living. But one we all have in common, and it occupies the same place on the list of reasons I'm alive, purposes I have to live. What's in the number one spot for every human being on the planet is make more of whatever is powerful and meaningful for you. In other words, the creation of more power and meaning is our number one purpose. Now, what makes us different is what's on my list of what's powerful and meaningful is different than what you have on your list. What you're pursuing and seeking is different than what I am, but what they have in common is, yeah, we want more power and meaning. That's number one. We want to increase that meaning in life. Now, everything else falls after that, but that's number one. So jumping back to, let me just take, I'm keeping my eye on the clock here, about 90 seconds just to talk about positive example of that. I go to my son-in-law. He just retired from the Navy as a lieutenant commander. And since the summer of 1992, he'd been in the Navy. It was his career. And when he enlisted, he took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And he took that to heart. And everything he did in the Navy was grew out of that. For a long time, he was in naval intelligence. Things he did involved espionage. He was in aircraft in which part of the aircraft was occupied by naval personnel, part of it was occupied by CIA personnel. And they went to places that people didn't want us to gather information that they didn't want us to have. And for about 10 years, he frequently got shot at by people. He's got several decorations, several ribbons indicating that, and some of them with special devices indicating how close to death he came on numerous occasions. And every time he got in his airplane, he ran that risk of not coming home, leaving my daughter a widow and his children without a father. But he kept doing it because for him, very top of the list of what was powerful and meaningful for him was that oath he took, even more than preserving his life to care for his family. That's what kept him going. Now, negative example has to do with addiction and addicts. Number one on the list of what's powerful and meaningful for an addict is the sick love relationship they have with the reward produced by mood altering chemicals. That's what makes life worth living for an addict. That's what gives life its meaning. That's what empowers an active addict, is using and having that experience. That's in the number one slot of the power list, the meaning list, and then by definition, since our purpose in life is to create more power and meaning, purpose in life for every addict is simply to live out. I discovered what I wanted to do as often as possible for the rest of my life. Hear those connections? So the moment an addict uses the first time, a spiritual experience occurs and a spiritual reorientation. The vast majority of folks aren't aware that it's happened at the time, but over time they become aware because they wind up reorienting everything about life to preserve and protect that relationship. Emotionally, active addicts like being numb because when they're not numb, it hurts. There's loneliness, sadness, guilt, shame, fear. And I'm just, I just can't imagine that any of you enjoy those feelings. Sitting around feeling shame-filled, guilt-filled, and so forth. So numbness is a good state to achieve, and mood-altering chemicals will get you there, along with a well-refined set of psychological defenses that keeps the emotional pain at bay. Mentally, intelligence, imagination, and creativity, just to take the top three of a list of 6 I have, well, they wind up being oriented around doing whatever's necessary to acquire mood-altering chemicals, use them, and avoid getting in trouble. So it's not that addicts get stupid when they're using, they become focused. Use my intelligence and imagination and creativity not to do schoolwork or improve myself on the job or any such thing, but to think of new creative ways of getting high without getting caught. Willpower. Active addicts are incredibly powerful people. They've not lost any strength of will at all. And that's one of the silly things about the way a lot of Americans look at addiction right now, is that addicts are folks who once upon a time had a level of willpower up here, started drinking and drugging, lost that willpower, get back on the screen, and making recovery a process of regaining willpower to stay sober. And nothing could be further from the truth. An active addict on the day of their heaviest use has as much willpower at their disposal as any other day in their lives. The only difference is that willpower is used for the purpose of using and avoiding trouble. It takes tremendous willpower to look somebody in the eye, especially somebody you love. Look them in the eye, lie to them, know that they know that you're lying to them, and pull it off over and over and over and over again. Weak-willed people can't do that. They cave in. Oh God, I'm telling you a story. I'm sorry. It takes strength of will to do that and to do it consistently over time. And then you have the combination of the cognitive skills the person has, along with the volitional, the willpower. You put them together, and you have folks who are capable of coming up with very intricate and refined schemes and plans to get high, not get in trouble, and the will to carry it out. And that's a huge piece of the addict experience. One more dimension of our humanity. Notice I've covered the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, mental, and the volitional. The last one I'm going to mention is the social. What we do is we live in environments, we seek out environments, people who are going to actively support our use and the activity, the behavior that goes with it, and avoid people who aren't. Those of you who've had family members and friends go away because of their use, well, that's what it's about. It's not necessarily that they love you any less, but they may see you as an impediment to to their getting high and doing what's necessary to get high. And they'd rather spend their time with folks who are going to be supportive of that rather than be some sort of impediment. So in a nutshell, that's a one sentence working definition of addiction and a very, very quick, brief, concise tour of the 6 vital dimensions of our humanity and how addiction affects it. Physically, we deteriorate. Spiritually, we wind up committing ourselves fully to recreating the experience of intoxication. We deaden ourselves emotionally because if we felt pain, it might interfere with our use. We don't get stupid, but we use our intelligence and our willpower to do what's necessary to get high. And we find ourselves in environments and with people that will support that. Those are all going on simultaneously at all times in active addicts. In active recovering people, all of those dimensions are engaged simultaneously as well, but they've just been transformed by recovery to find new ways of living, new ways of organizing life, relationships, and so forth, allowing myself to experience the full range of my emotions, and to rearrange what's powerful and meaningful so that that spiritual dimension gets rearranged and different things are empowering me and different things I'm finding meaningful in life. Well, I think I'll stop there. Questions? Anybody have anything after
We get
all of that?
I don't, Mama Madeline, do we have any questions? I can't believe that. Now, see, we used to keep you going for 3 hours at a time, Dr. Price, with questions.
That's right.
Let's count to 10 and see if any questions come in.
Yeah. I
Questions
would
about
like
anything.
to say this. Dr. Price has dedicated his life to this. And I have to admit, about 9 years ago, sitting in his class, it's when I decided that's who I want to be when I grow up. So I'm still working on growing up, Dr. Price, because I tell this, and I told this at the first webinar, that I don't think a counseling session goes by or any recovery work I do or any relapse prevention work I do that I either don't quote you or tell a story that you have shared, because I think you have such a wonderful way of putting it in relatable terms and explaining what really happens. You know, people who suffer from substance use disorder, addicts, whatever you want to call us, that are in recovery are not horrible people. We have a disease. Sure. And I think you address that so well and put it in such good terms that it does just take over our lives, becomes the single most important thing.
And
I talked about, go ahead, Gene, hey. Oh.
Hey, I haven't forgotten your definition of addiction, an unnatural love affair with a mood-altering chemical.
Yeah.
Me too, Gene. I can quote my elevator speech at all times. So defining addiction.
Yeah. Well, let me add one thing. I was, Mary, just reminded me of something I was actually talking with a group of patients about this morning. There's a lot of fuss about language. I mean, I've been doing this for 41 years, and I'm not a porcelain doll. Those of us with addiction are not porcelain dolls. We're not going to shatter based on what folks say. And what one of the patients was talking about was that he was talking about normal people. And I let him go on for a while about that. And I says, okay, but here's what I want you to try on. That you are a normal person who just happens to have an addict brain. And then I went on with that. I mean, myself, I'm a normal human being who happens to have an addict brain and nearsighted eyes and color blindness. Not just being nearsighted or being colorblind, it doesn't make me abnormal. It's just something I have. Same with addiction. And you know, anyway, it generated a lot of conversation among them, you know, just that notion of, oh yeah, it's a chronic brain disease. All right, like a lot of other things. Not something anybody chooses, not something anybody creates. It's something that's there based on the structure of a particular individual's brain, and it's just there, has been, and always will be. It's not that us addicts are folks who get 200 free uses of any mood altering chemical we want. And when we use the 201st time, up, shoot, there it is. We got that chronic brain disease. It's there. That's why I always tell the story of my son, because he's just, he's just so eloquent about it. And that line he came up with that I heard literally the first time I heard him lead at an AA meeting. And I always quote him, and I credit him with it. I'd love to take credit for it myself, but I can't. It was his. But it really captures the essence of the experience. And yeah, normal folks who have brains structured for a particular experience, when they ingest mood altering chemicals, and voila, the things we wind up doing in order to support and protect that relationship, well, that's where the ugly stuff happens. Doesn't define any of us, but it's just there, and yeah, something we live with, something I live with.
Something I learned from Columbus Public when I taught there, it's person first. We're a person with an addiction. We aren't an addict. Because I had kids, well, I'm ADHD. And I'm like, no, you're a person with ADHD. And we can work on that.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about I wanted to see if I couldn't get those 5 items. I believe you said there's a social, mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional aspects.
Yeah. In fact, what you can do, that I do, is draw a circle and then put 5 petals around the circle, and you got a daisy. The center is the spiritual, and the 5 petals are the physical, the mental, the social, the volitional, and the emotional. Now, we have a lot of other dimensions of our humanity, but those are the 6 that are most greatly affected by active addiction. And we can talk about all kinds of things, but those are the ones that really capture the essence of the experience, and are necessary to experience change to support recovery. So, yeah.
And I can relate to what your son does, because I did that for the Navy too.
Yeah. Yeah, he was, yeah. We got lots of, he's the one that actually tipped me off, and I started looking for that with the rise of opiate use in the United States. Just as a sidelight, in my classes, I don't know if Gene or Mary remember this, but I used to, on the board, I would have a list of what I called things that make us sound stupid. There was a bunch of stuff on that list.
I covered most of those.
I won't belabor you with what's on it. But in the mid-2000s, Kenny was home on leave. We were talking, and he said, we got orders this year to not crop dust the Afghan opium crop. And I heard that, and I just thought, well, I won't tell you what I said, but it was profane, because I knew exactly in about 18 months, we were going to have an overabundance of heroin on the streets of the United States. Now, we fuss a lot about this so-called opiate epidemic, you know, looking at, the big pharmaceuticals that came up with OxyContin and all that. What doesn't get talked about nearly as much, and should, is the American government's political decision to stop killing the opium poppy crop in Afghanistan to support the provincial warlords, to support the Karzai government in Kabul back in the mid-2000s. Because as soon as we stopped doing that, well, all the peasant farmers produced bumper crops of opium poppies that all floated through Southeast Asia and wound up here. And that coincided with the rise of the prescription opiate piece, but you wound up with really cheap heroin. So anyway, that's a little piece of historical trivia for you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Price. if we do a third one of these, you know, you're top of my list. Thank you. And maybe someday when I grow up, I can do this like you do. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And
Cool.
I think one of the questions that comes up for anyone who knows people who suffer from substance use disorder or who suffers themselves, we wonder, why can't they just stop? Why don't they just stop? Here are the consequences. I know it's a love relationship with the mood altering substance, but for heaven's sakes, they're losing everything. Why can't they stop? Well, we have a video that we'd like to share with you. It's called Hijacking the Brain. And I think you'll get kind of the point of what happens to the brain, which of someone who is using substances. So George, if we could share that video.
Scientists first began to understand addiction as a brain disorder in the 1950s. Doctors Olds and Milner, in laboratory studies of rats, found the parts of the brain affected by addiction. But then in 1994, doctors Volkov and Shelbert, top neuroscientists, ran CAT scans of the brain that showed the effects of substance use disorders. Like other diseases, these scans showed it affected tissue function. There are two main parts of the brain affected by drug use: the limbic system and the cortex. The limbic system, located deep within the brain, is responsible for our basic survival instincts. So when you do essential things to stay alive, like eat, drink, find shelter, have sex, or care for your young, your brain reinforces behaviors that cause the release of dopamine from this region. That reward for surviving is also transmitted to the amygdala and hippocampus, which records a memory of that feeling, so we seek it again. This is our survival hardwiring. Addiction also affects this area, up here, in the prefrontal cortex, which is what separates us from other animals. This is where decision-making and impulse control live. When drugs or alcohol are used, they activate the same dopamine process in the survival center. And when use is repeated, that substance can hijack that part of the brain. This hijacker changes the brain and weakens this system to make it believe that the primary need for survival is the drug. In hijacking the brain, it can usurp those primary motivations: food, water, shelter, sex, and protecting our young. And the hijacker needs more and more of the substance to activate the same level of reward or feeling of pleasure, causing the brain tissue to become increasingly damaged with continued drug use. There are factors that put you at higher risk for the hijacker, including individual factors like genes and age of first use, and then environmental factors like drug availability. But if the hijacker takes hold, addiction is treatable. Advancements have been made in assessments, detox, treatment programs, recovery supports, and medications to treat addiction. Brain scans show that once in recovery, the tissue in the limbic system and cortex can get better. With your help, we can expand these innovations to help millions of individuals and families and ensure that addiction is treated as the medical issue that it is. Together, we can solve this. Join us.
Okay, I think you get the idea of why they can't just stop. But we've talked a lot today, and I hope we've educated you. I hope we've informed you. In other words, we worked on the head part, and I'm sure Dana and Rachel and people with your own stories, you got the heart. We all know somebody, whether it's a grandchild, a sister, a niece, a grandson, a neighbor's child. We all know people who suffer from substance use disorder. So now that we've got this working, let's think about what we can do with these, what we can do with the hands. And so I would like our community, outreach manager, Mujadid, who I think has talked to an awful lot of you about actions that we can take together to address what's going on. So Mujadid, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Cool.
Can
Yay.
everyone hear me?
Just a minute. Is it good?
Can everyone hear me? Okay, so yeah, so I did speak with a lot of you, some by phone, some via email, about possible action steps that could be formed after the webinar series. And this is just something to put on your mind, to think about. We have sponsoring a care package. It could be showing the educational webinar series that you're viewing now. At the completion of it, you could set up a showing with your community to show this same webinar series. There's also a book reading that you could do. And the book that we would select for that is called This is Ohio, The Overdose Crisis and the Front Lines of a New America by Jack Schuler. You could donate gas cards, bus passes, or Lyft cards that we could provide to individuals who are coming out of incarceration or in recovery. Or you could choose to sponsor a Narcon box to someone or some agency. You could opt to change the language that you use, such as, instead of, crackhead or addict, substance abuse user. And I believe we talked about some of that, language today, right? So there are all types of actions that you can take, but these are only suggestions that we're offering right now that you can take. So as you form your teams and whatnot, these are things that you could talk about, and these are not exclusive action steps. You may have some of your own that you want to come up with, but we just wanted to let you know that these are some suggestions that we have thought about implementing, and you could embrace those suggestions.
Okay, thanks, Mujadid. I'm going to ask Jody and then Mama Madeline, who I can see her, she's at the ready on her computer. If you could expand a little bit about what might be included in a coming home kit, or ideas on why a gas card. I mean, we're not just tossing things out, there are reasons behind this. So perhaps the two of you, we have a couple of minutes, could kind of expand on the action steps that we're asking people to take.
And these steps at either teams, if some of you are in teams, and we'll be meeting in teams and we'll be able to plan in teams, but there are things here, I think, that individuals can do. And at the end, we're going to give you an option to maybe, if you aren't on a team, that we could still have some of you as individuals get together to do something. Madeline, I'll talk about the coming home, or the getting out of prison or rehab or wherever you are, where you don't have anything in your coming home kit. And then if you can talk a little bit about the transportation. So you're coming out of recovery. You've lost your home. You've lost, maybe they've taken away your clothes. Maybe, I mean, you just don't have what you need to have. And so an idea that many people do is to do a backpack or a kit of some sort, a bag, something that one can carry that has something in it for the first 3 days. Could have ramen noodles and crackers and Oreo cookies and drink mix or whatever, but it needs to have a razor, and it needs to have a toothpaste, and there needs to be underwear and a bus pass, and maybe a phone that has 100 minutes already on it. But be creative and think about, if you were coming out without anything and somebody handed you a bag and said, here, this is for 3 days, what would you put in it? So that would be the bag that we're talking about. And then Madeline, can you talk about our idea about the transportation help?
Sure. Our idea is that people in lots of communities don't have access easily to public transportation, or they don't have money to pay for the bus tickets, and they don't have a car, and they've got a job, but they haven't got a way to get to work. So a bus pass or a lift ticket or a gas card, if they've got a car, a gas card can be really helpful to help them get their feet on the ground and not have to beg rides or walk for miles to get to the job that they just got now that they're rebuilding their lives. So that's the idea.
Okay, thank you. Mujahid, do you have anything else to add?
The only thing that I would add is that, we're in the process. I was discussing this with Jody and Mary and Mama Madeline about, setting up something permanent going forward where, when individuals came out, even after this webinar series is over with, this is something that we could continue on, where we become a permanent resource for individuals that are coming out, when they need things as they seek to transition and rebuild their lives. HPI, or the Horizon Prison Initiative, could become a permanent resource in that regard. So although this is something that we're starting on this webinar series platform, it is our hope that it's something that we will be able to continue on even after this is over and become a permanent resource for that. So that is the only thing that I would add at this time.
Thank you, Mujahid. It just ran through my mind. Every once in a while, I have one of these woo-hoo light bulbs. For those of you who aren't familiar with Horizon Prison Initiative, although I recognize an awful lot of names of participants, but if you are new and you don't know what we do, Horizon Prison Initiative is a multi-faith transformative program that works inside the prison with our participants and then alongside our returned citizens when they get back to their communities. So we are branching out. We are going to have the opportunity to incorporate, yes, one day, re-entry as part of our work. I'm the eternal optimist. I talk like we've already got approval, but
we're meeting on Monday. Our Heartbeats
Yes,
reunion
yes.
will meet on Monday.
And just to support and mentor our restored and our returned citizens. So this is something that we live. I mean, that we really, really realize it's important. And I know I work in ORW with the women. 80% of the women who are incarcerated at ORW suffer from some type of substance use disorder, and their charges directly relate to their addiction. So they're going to come home, and we want them to come home healed, and we want them to come home and be able to stay home and return to their families and be beneficial to their community. And to do that, it takes support, it takes mentoring, it takes not just dropping them at the corner, but it takes walking alongside them. So I'll get off my soapbox now, and we need to collect some demographics. In order for us to keep our mental health grant and to cover the costs of these webinars, we need to collect some demographics for you. So our technical guru is going to put up on the screen a survey, and please, we really do need you to complete this. Madeline, Jody, and I can't pay for this out of our pockets. So we need this grant, and please complete the survey. So George, if you'll put that up.
We are waiting for the Pope. Take a deep breath.
While we're waiting, I'd like to just let people know that I'm with the Church for All People, and what I do is I provide birth certificates and bus passes for people, as well as temporary lodging.
Yes.
And you can reach me at one of two places, and that's at my nonprofit organization, which is at 888-520-7773. Or you could reach the Church for All People at 614-445-7342.
I will.
And we do provide.
Could you put those in the chat?
Statement fees for driver's licenses, bus passes, temporary lodging with meals, and in some cases, security deposits up to $100 if they have an apartment or something that they need to, they need these things to get the utilities turned on. And that
Can you put those numbers in the chat?
Sure.
Have your chat on down at the bottom there? If you could put that in the chat, that would be very helpful. And what's going to happen is in order to get the poll up, we have to temporarily take a little break. So breathe deep, and George will get us back in just a second.
It'll just be temporary.
Hold on.
And please take the survey.
Do they have to all come back in, or can they? Okay. We didn't have to do this last time.